Some people believe that business principles do not apply to philanthropy. In one way, that's probably true, but in many other ways, it's definitely not true. Business is nothing but a collection of consenting human beings that are coming together to achieve certain goals. The goals are admittedly easy to measure. It's profits, it's growth in sales, it's things that we all know about business. Football is equally easy to measure. You've got 1 hour on the field, you've got two teams, it's very digital, you've got a scoreboard, you've got rules on how to create points. You play the game, and at the end of it, it's quite digital. You knew who won and who didn't win. In philanthropy, I think you have very important goals. They're perhaps far more important than business goals. In fact, I know they are. They're far more meaningful and far more important. For example, not how to drive a bigger car or, buy better wine, but how to create a better future for our children. To me, that's far more compelling than, the ability to amass wealth. The question is, what does one do with that wealth? That's the important question. And there's a lot of different answers to it. I think we're moving into a paradigm where the answers are becoming trickier. That's because the wealth is growing. I think a lot of serious people are beginning to question whether wealth should be equated with spending or whether it should be detached from spending. If you detach it from spending, then you're ended up with more wealth, which becomes a dilemma. That dilemma is solved with philanthropy. But getting back to the question of whether skills in business apply to philanthropy, why would they not? After all, philanthropy is a collection of hardworking, dedicated people to achieve goals. The goals may not be quarterly profits. They might be something like jobs in Somalia, but you can measure jobs in Somalia. Admittedly, it's a lot tougher to measure jobs in Somalia than it is to measure profits in real estate. But it's still possible to do that. You know that you're going well along the path to peace when the body bags are diminishing. Fortunately, in the world over the last several hundred years, the body bag counts have been diminishing greatly. Over the last several centuries, they're down over 100-fold. That is, a young man being born today or a young woman is 100 times less likely to die a violent death in war than they were several hundred years ago. So we are becoming more peaceful. The question is, can we finish the job? Can we put war behind us? I think we can, if we apply a rigorous methodology to it, if we are analytic about it, if we understand what the drivers are, if we're passionate and committed, if we're all committed to a goal, and I'd like that goal to be peace by the end of the century, and if humanity cooperates and decides that that goal is worth pursuing, then I believe that we can make it happen. There are a lot of disruptors and a lot of spoilers. Nobody is going to be able to achieve peace. You can achieve inner peace, perhaps. You can achieve peace in your family. You can achieve peace in your community. But as we all know, there are a lot of spoilers out there. So this is a dialogue for all of humanity. It's not just a dialogue for those of us who would like to see it happen. We have to include all stakeholders. And more especially, and this is ironic, we have to include the stakeholders of those who are against peace. Why? They're the people that want us to do war. And until we convert them, we won't have a peaceful world. In order to convert them, you must listen to them. And in fact, it's probably not so much a conversion as it is an act of listening. If you can listen and understand what the problems are, if you can solve their problems, then I believe you will be on the path to peace. If a few kumbaya peaceniks get it, you're not very far along the path to peace. Those are the people who already get it. I remember my son telling me when I explained to him, he was 12 years old at the time, why we had these foundations. And he looked at me and he said, well, you and Mom already get peace. He said, I don't think that's the problem. It's what about the guy at Walmart? You know, what does he think? Until he thinks there should be a peaceful world, there's not going to be a peaceful world. There's a lot of wisdom in that. So in other words, the people who want the world to become peaceful could potentially be a very lonely group that is very hopeful and unable to solve the problem. It takes all of humanity. It takes systems. Some of the systems that we need to create peace, like the International Criminal Court, are new. They take the worst behaviors that mankind or leaders can do to its people, and they put them on trial. And they put them on trial in order that this doesn't happen again in the future. So these kind of institutions are part of the reason why we're moving towards peace. We need new institutions. The nation states don't cooperate well together. They're independent agents bouncing around, and some of them have tremendous power, others have less power, but they're not coordinated. The UN is not a very strong organization. The UN can't stop two countries from going to war unless they're small countries, and unless the Security Council decides that this war shouldn't happen, and then decides to intervene. So we don't really have the institutions at the global level that'll keep us from going to war. Simply put, in order to get to peace, it will require most of humanity, not all of humanity. We live in a peaceful society here in Boulder County. There are periodic murders, but most of the people in Boulder County believe that it's wrong. Most of them would not indulge in violent behavior. A few do. It's tolerable, it's not perfect, but basically you'd say that you would be happy to raise your child in Boulder County knowing that they have a good life. The question is, how can we, and by the way, that doesn't have to be Boulder County. There are many parts of the world that live that way and live that way very well. So the question is, how do we spread that? How do we make that the default position where people believe that's the way the society ought to operate? It's not the madmen that come along once in a while, but how do we create a system where these madmen don't have traction? We've been able to move past a lot of behaviors who were once thought to be normal. For example, throwing people into a volcano, or throwing them down a well, or hanging them. That was perceived to be reasonable at one time. We now know that that behavior was wrong. Another example that many people talk about is dueling. Dueling came from pre-medieval Europe. It was considered a very efficient way of two people settling their claims. The person that lived in a duel was regarded as a person who was probably right. You didn't have to have jails, you didn't have to have judges, all you had to have was duels. We moved beyond that with a system. We have the court system now. And the court system is a much more humane way of solving our differences. The difficulty is that the equivalence in the dueling is now the nation state. How do you take the nation state and keep them from utilizing their power in a sense that they believe they're doing the right thing? How do you corral them? How do you get them to question themselves before the bombers take off? How do you get that? I believe that humanity has the capability of moving beyond that paradigm. We would think that a duel, a pistol duel today or a sword duel, was unthinkable. A couple hundred years ago, it was not unthinkable, even in this country. It was what you did. Today, it's unthinkable. So the question is, how do we get society to a position? How do we finish the job of getting society into a position, the global society, where war is unthinkable? We did it with dueling. We did it with throwing virgins into a volcano to make the rains happen. And I think we have the capability of doing it in war.